In the interest of full disclosure, I want to make it known that I did receive a free copy of the book Inspiring Creativity Through Magic directly from Llewellyn Publications. Despite receiving a complimentary copy, I did my best to still give an unbiased opinion of this book. In the winter of 2009, I was deeply engrossed in writing what would become my first finished book, when I noticed there was a spirit in the room with me. He showed up at the edge of my vision as a small, shadowy figure who was barely discernible, but definitely there. The spirit was no larger than my cat, and he stared at me in a similar manner. Of course, this spirit wasn't my cat. Casper lay curled up beside me on an ottoman whenever I wrote. He was blissfully unaware of the spirit, just as he ignored the items that seemed to give me so much inspiration. My steaming cup of tea, the sodalite I kept beside my laptop, the blue pillar candle that lit up the room, and the rose incense. I was surprised to see an unfamiliar spirit in my writing room, but not as surprised as other people might be. As a witch, I'd seen many kinds of spirits. I'd even worked magic with them in rituals and spells. However, this spirit was unlike all the other ones I'd seen. I'd never seen one so short and squat. Also, he had somehow gotten through all the protection magic I had woven around my house to keep out random spirits. Even though he was technically an intruder, he didn't act like other spirits who had trespassed into my home before. There were no whispered lies, no favors asked. There was no negative energy, and he wasn't drawing my energy away from me. It seemed that this polite little spirit didn't want anything from me at all. He was peaceful, patient, and content to stand at the edge of my sight and within my energetic bubble. I felt as if he were waiting for something to happen. All these feelings, as well as my curiosity about what kind of spirit he may be, kept me from banishing him. That first time I noticed him, I turned so I could get a better look at him. In the brief time it took for my eyes to alight upon the place where he had been, he vanished. There was nothing there apart from the shiny black wooden floor. There wasn't even a trace of energy to show that he had been there at all. I recall feeling puzzled and somewhat relieved that he was gone, even though he didn't seem threatening. However, I didn't linger on it. I didn't need a mystery to solve. I needed to keep writing. Not long afterward, while I was writing with my creative correspondences, he arrived again. I continued writing while viewing him in more detail. He didn't reveal much of himself, but his shadowy presence took more of a shape. He appeared as a large black bird, but with some human traits too. To my surprise, he also wore a tiny black suit, a pocket watch, and a monocle, like a gentleman crow from another era. I set my disbelief aside to pay attention to my writing, which started to flow more effortlessly than it had before he arrived. It had been a difficult scene to write, and I was struggling to make my vision of the events intelligible. However, as soon as he arrived, the words came through so much more easily. A pleasurable sensation trickled down from the top of my head like cool water or an icy breeze that relaxed and invigorated me. The story you just heard comes from the introduction to Estrella Taylor's book, Inspiring Creativity Through Magic: How to Ritualize Your Art and Attract the Creative Spirit. In case you couldn't tell, attracting the creative spirit in this case is quite literal. And we're going to go into more detail on that in tonight's episode. I'm your host, Jason, and you're listening to the Esoteric Book Club. Welcome back, Goblins! I'm your host, Jason, and tonight we're taking a look at the book Inspiring Creativity Through Magick, and basically learning how to attract and utilize your own personal muse. But first, I want to take a moment to thank the members of the Esoteric Archive, specifically Grand Inquisitor Annie K, Grand Inquisitor Samantha, and now Grand Inquisitor Soul Rising Studios. Your contributions help purchase reading material, pay server costs, and recently purchase industrial levels of caffeine that helps to stave off my seasonal migraines. Seriously, thank you so much. I couldn't get through this without all this coffee. This is normally where I would give you all the information about how to join the Esoteric Archive, but I have a few announcements to make. Just not right now. I'm going to wait until the end of the episode to let you know what all is happening behind the scenes. So for now, let's get weird. Anyone creative who has some sort of artistic flair, some sort of talent that they like to do, has experienced a creative block at some point in their life. It could be exhaustion, it could be boredom, it could be lack of inspiration. But at some point, you just don't feel like creating. So what do you do to get back your drive, your motivation? Sometimes you just need to take a break. And sometimes you may need to be a little more proactive. Throughout the centuries, various artists have talked about their muse, their inspiration, their driving spirit. This is oftentimes seen as a metaphor, something intangible, some sort of allegory for an inspiring spirit. But what if it could be a bit more direct, something more tangible, something a bit more predictable? As long as we've had artists who have referred to their creative spirits, there have also been magical practitioners who summon and control and work with spirits of their own. The trick with inspirational spirits, though, is that they tend to be capricious. The harder you try to grasp onto them, the harder you try to keep them around, to hold them tight, the more likely they are to flee. I can't remember exactly where I heard it, but I've heard trying to grasp onto a creative spirit is like trying to hold water with a closed fist. The harder you squeeze, the less you retain. What you ideally need to do is create an environment that is inviting, that is enticing to these spirits. You want them to choose to remain. You don't want to force them there. I've already used the term muse several times, but the muses are a very specific set of spirits from ancient Greece. It just has grown into become a generalized term for any spirit that inspires creativity. That said, throughout the years, there have been many spirits that have been attributed to creativity, such as angels, demons, something called the genius, duende, even the witch's familiar, which, again, in this book is pointed out that not all pets are familiars and not all familiars are pets. That's a whole different rant for another time, though. In addition to demons, we also have devils, divine spirits, ancestors, the Fae, and channeled spirits. In modern terms, we've even talked about tapping into the subconscious mind, or the flow state. Whatever term you may use for it, or whatever spirit you may attribute the results to, there are specific methods that you can use to achieve this method of creativity. One of the most important things that you can do is once you figure out what it takes to get into this state, you need to ritualize it. That way it becomes repeatable. That's one of the big aspects in this book, and it's using routine to ritualize a process. Now, just doing the same thing over and over and over again in a predictable manner isn't always enough. Sometimes you need things that engage all the senses. Let's review the story that I told in the introduction of today's episode. Estrella mentioned that when she was writing, she had a steaming cup of tea, sodalite, a blue pillar candle, and rose incense. Sure, it all sounds very witchy, but think about it. She is engaging all of her senses for the writing process. The tea covers the sense of taste. The candle and the incense covers smell. In fact, the candle also covers sound because, I don't know about you, but if I hear a candle burning in a quiet room, you still get that little tingle, that little background crackle. And then even for touch, she has the sodalite. Now, she may not be handling the sodalite while she's writing, which, granted, that would be very difficult to use both hands if you're holding sodalite, but it's there. It is a reminder. It is a texture. In this case, it is a literal touchstone. And then you have the reminder of the color blue. Blue is there for creativity. It is a color associated with inspiration. It is a color associated with a clear mind. Just picture what it's like looking up at the open sky or at the open sea. Your mind is calm and empty because of the vastness of what you're observing. All of these elements put together are what Estrella calls her creative correspondences. Now, these creative correspondences are what works for her. You will have to figure out what your personal creative correspondences are. And it may not even just be things that you place on your desk or around your workstation. For me personally, my creative correspondences also involve a hot shower, a cup of coffee, and, depending on what's going on, something just to fill my stomach. I can't really work that well when I'm hungry, you know? On my desk, I also have several little gnome statues. Something about those little guys has this combination of both industry and whimsy. I kind of like that they're goofy, they're silly, but they're also known for getting things done, in a very narrow scope of focus, of course. I also have a series of gemstones. I have septarian, serpentine, moss agate, and even some specular hematite. Traditionally, these stones aren't known for creativity. In fact, none of them are even blue. But for me, these stones show a wandering path. They produce a variety of different textures, different stories. They remind me that separate elements can be combined into a singular whole. The final aspect of my own personal creative correspondence is a little tricky. I figured out that I record best when I'm wide awake, so early in the morning, sometimes before lunch. My writing, though, tends to be better if I'm mostly tired, which is where the coffee tends to make it a little tricky. The coffee keeps me awake and alert enough to actually write, but my mind has slowed down quite a bit because all I want to do is go to sleep. It's in this weird twilight where my words tend to flow the easiest. Does this mean I've seen my own personal muse? No, I'm actually not clairvoyant. I don't see spirits. Unless, of course, that's actually what that ghost cat is. I'm going to have to experiment a bit with that one. That all sounds well and good, I'm sure, but how do you go about finding your own correspondences? Well, there's a lot of trial and error and self-reflection, but this book actually breaks it down into several steps that will help you figure this out. And these steps are divided up based on the 4 elements. That's really what makes this book unique compared to other books on building creativity and building creative practices. This book takes it in a very witchy turn. It's very methodical, and it breaks each section down into very manageable, bite-sized pieces. Let's begin by taking a look at the section on air. Now, this section is subtitled Vision and Inspiration, and that will give you a general idea of what you're going to be learning about and what you will be cultivating in this chapter. The very first thing that you have to do is to believe that you are an artist. For a lot of people, this is the biggest and most insurmountable hurdle. But Estrella really breaks it down quite well. An artist isn't determined by their level of skill. They're not determined by their output, the quantity of art that they create. Hell, you could be an artist and never actually produce anything, as long as you have a creative mindset that is constantly creating. It's more about your potential and how you view the world. Working with air, it deals a lot with your thoughts and beliefs and understanding, but it also comes with the ability to jump around from project to project, probably a little more frequently than you should be. In fact, that's actually addressed in this chapter as well. Focus on a single project at a time. Finally, think about how the element of air is represented in ritual. It's an intangible thing, so we have to do something a little creative. We use sound, such as from bells, or incense, which gives you a scent. And really, that same thing is applied here. For the sound, you may have background music, or a podcast, or you may have one of those weird YouTube channels that just plays brown noise in the background for hours on end. If you haven't tried that, it actually works really well for writing. Scent is a shockingly powerful tool for this as well. If you get used to smelling a single odor over and over and over again in relation to a specific job or event or task, whenever you smell that again, you will instantly be placed in the mindset of said task. I don't think people really understand how strong our sense of smell really is as far as memory and recall. For example, if I burn the HEM forest scent incense, I am instantly transported 20 years back in time to campouts that I had in high school. Whatever sawdust they use in that incense is the same type of wood that we were burning in our campfires during those campouts. So imagine how powerful it would be if you had a specific scent that you could link directly to being in the creative flow state. Next up, we're going to the element of fire. Now, fire is largely intangible. It is about courage, inspiration, passion, love, desire. It's these very big motivating forces. And that's a really logical extension from what we just talked about with air. Because remember what I said about being an artist. You don't have to produce art necessarily to be an artist. But it is a little easier to call yourself an artist if you actually have something to show for it. For a lot of people, that step between concept and execution is one that they never really cross. Lots of people have these really good, really inspired ideas, but then they second guess themselves. They talk themselves out of it. They say, well, I don't have the skill to execute this the way that I see it in my head. And that is largely what this chapter is about. It's about getting the motivation to start and maintaining the momentum to keep going. In my own life, I have had tons of people ask me how to start a podcast and what my best advice is. And I can give them all the technical details, but really I'm not telling them anything that they won't get on a YouTube video. What I do tell them is to just record. And remember, your first episode is going to be awful, regardless of what the topic is. but you have to do it. You have to get it done, you have to get it out of the way, because that is the only way you can improve. And if that first recording weren't nerve-wracking enough, you also have to have the courage to release it. Now, the creative correspondence for this chapter is, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that it's kind of optional because not everybody is able to actually do this. The idea is to burn a candle. Depending on where you actually live, you may not be allowed to have open flame in, say, an apartment or a dorm room. But there is an aspect of the candle burning ritual that you can still utilize, and that is the color. The effects of color on your psyche are almost as strong as the recall power of scent. So while the chapter recommends that you burn a candle of a corresponding color based on what you're trying to inspire, I suggest that you actually use the color aspect more than the actual candle itself. Let's say you're writing a passage, and you're trying to evoke a specific mood for the characters in that passage. If you wear clothing that is a corresponding color that you associate with that mood, that will help enhance the quality of your writing. Let's say you're trying to write something that is sad or mournful. If you go into this process wearing pastel pink and yellow, do you think you're really going to be able to get into the same mindset as someone who is potentially at a funeral? Probably not. Now, you're not just restricted to the color of your clothing either. With the mass production of cheaply made LED lights, we can literally change the color of our rooms with a push of a button. Are you writing about something woodsy? Change the lights to green. Are you trying to be seductive? Make your room blood red. You have unlimited potential just with the background lighting alone. For those of you listening who are under the age of, say, 20 or so, just feel lucky that you have this option. Back when I was your age, we had to throw sheer fabric over top of a lamp and hope that it didn't catch fire. It was a great way to set the mood, but that mood usually turned to panic when you started to smell smoke. The next element in our list is water. Water is associated with creativity, workflow, and emotions. This chapter is largely motivational text, so there's not really too much that I can go into. As a result, I'm just going to jump straight into the creative correspondence for the element of water, and in this case, it's beverages. We all know how important it is to remain hydrated, especially when you're caught up in a creative pursuit. But your choice of drink, and what you drink it from, has as much an effect as anything else. Are you drinking clean spring water directly from a plastic bottle? Are you drinking a freshly brewed cup of coffee from a novelty mug that you got on vacation? Or are you drinking craft beer directly from an antique beer stein? How do you think each of these would affect your creative flow? The artisanal water probably isn't going to do too much besides keep you hydrated. But the coffee is a stimulant. And beer is a depressant. Now, I'm not suggesting you actually try this example, but imagine trying to meditate. If you try to meditate on coffee, you're probably not going to get too far. The water, yeah, that might work pretty well. Couple pints of beer, well, you may just end up going to sleep. There's one more aspect of using water for creativity that often gets overlooked, and that is something as simple as bathing. Think about it. What kind of effect do you have from a cold shower? How does a hot shower affect you? How does a long soak in a bathtub affect your creativity? All of these can be used to generate inspiration. In most manuals on ritual magic, they will suggest that you bathe ritually beforehand. Well, in this instance, we are doing rituals to inspire creativity. So really, this shouldn't be any different. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, for me, it's a hot shower, hot coffee. The nice thing about using hot liquids for this part of your ritual is that you oftentimes also get scent to go along with it. Finally, we come to the earth element. And what do we associate with earth besides dirt and rocks? Yeah, that's right, plants and crystals. Before we get into the creative correspondences for earth, let's talk about the intangibles about this element. Now, earth is about being steadfast and growing and being supported. But it's also about taking a break. Think about seasonal cycles. We have 4 seasons, and one of those seasons is about dormancy. Sometimes you have to take a break in order to achieve growth. I've actually run into this with my own art in the past. Say, for example, I was working on a painting, and I've been working all month long, and I just can't get it right. I can't really say what's wrong with it, but I know there's something missing. So I put the painting away. I literally remove it from my field of vision, so I can't see it. And then, after about a month, I look at it again. And generally, I can take one look at it, one glance, and say, oh, I need to do this one little thing, and that's it. I know it seems really strange considering we just spent 3 chapters talking about how to get motivated, how to continue motivation, how to keep your drive going. But creativity is like a vehicle. Getting the motion, getting the momentum is only part of it. At some point, you also have to stop. More than that, it's about control and regulation. And that's where the creative correspondences really come in. So that's the use of different herbs and crystals. Now, there's not a ton of detail on either one of these in this book, but that's mostly because these fields are so broad and so varied that there's entire volumes dedicated just to the correspondences of magic crystals and the use of medicinal herbs. So while the basics are there, for example, using blue crystals to inspire creativity, or say using cinnamon to enhance clarity, you're still going to have to do a little bit more research on your own outside of this book. So all of these elements combined already seem like a huge quantity of information. But this is only half of the book. The rest I'm going to leave for you to discover, but I can tell you that it has information on creating thought forms, building altars, doing divination, which is surprisingly good for the creative process. If you're anything like me, you're probably sitting there wondering, who is this book exactly for? I would actually say that this book is really good for someone who is just starting an artistic journey or just starting a magical journey. Specifically for an artist who is still new to magic. For someone who is already experienced in the creative process, in art, and in magical theory, this book will really come about more as a thought exercise. In my case, it didn't really teach me anything new specifically, but it did make me more aware of the processes that I'm already going through. And by making me aware of them, it allowed me to make them more ritualized. So if you're running into a mental block in your creative or artistic pursuits, maybe grab a copy of this book and do a brush up on your basic skills. And if you've never considered using art to enhance your magical practice, maybe that's something else that you should consider. If any of this sounds intriguing to you, grab yourself a copy of Inspiring Creativity Through Magic: How to Ritualize Your Art and Attract the Creative Spirit by Estrella Taylor. As always, I'll post a link in the show notes. Now, before we jump to the Patreon extension, I mentioned earlier that I have some announcements to make. Over the next few months, I will be winding down the Esoteric Book Club. That's right, After 4 seasons, the show will be ending. At least ending as it's currently being released. This show has been a wonderful hobby, and while I do have some loyal goblins, the show isn't financially self-sustaining. Outside of this podcast, I actually already have 2 other jobs, and I'm preparing to pick up a third. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Now, while I can't elaborate on what this third job is actually going to be, it does give me the potential to help a lot of people in my local community. From here on out, I'm going to do my best to maintain the regular release schedule that I have set up, new moon episodes and full moon episodes. But I can't guarantee that I'll be able to maintain that schedule throughout the full 13 episodes of the season. It may become a bit more sporadic towards the end. That said, there are a handful of books that I want to release before the show ends, and a handful of authors that I would like to interview. I also want to give a shout out to one of my loyal listeners, Kevin, who suggested an episode on black-eyed kids. So Kevin, I'm going to do my best to get one of those episodes released before the end of Season 4. And Dazo's Crow Song, you sent me a book entitled Jailbreaking the Goddess, so before the show ends, I'll be reviewing that book as well. Now, because the show is ending, I'm also going to be streamlining the Patreon for however many episodes remain. From here on out, if you pledge even just $1 a month to the Esoteric Book Club, you get all the Patreon episodes unlocked. For anybody who pledges $5 or more a month, you will be mentioned by name on every episode. And that's it. I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. As always, patrons will get episodes released as soon as I get them done. I can't guarantee that it will be too early compared to the actual release date, but, it's something. So for now, patrons, stick around. I'm doing a review on the 5-Minute Druid. For everyone else, until next time, remember, stay weird. It's time, once again, to open the Esoteric Archive. Tonight we're checking out the book, The 5-Minute Druid, Connections Made Easy, by Sarah Beth Watkins. Now this is a brand new book from Moon Publications. It came out sometime in 2024, which means it's, maybe a month old at best. And it's one of the few rare books that delivers directly on the title. You know exactly what you're getting when you see the cover. You are learning how to continue your druid practice in just 5 minutes a day.